And welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on Oregon Duck Football News. I'm Warren Williamson, joined by Gary Horowitz of the Statesman Journal, beat writer for the Oregon Ducks and for the Beavers, of course. Gary, a lot to talk about this week. I guess a lot of disappointment. Oregon goes down on Thursday night. Just your initial impressions on the way that Oregon played and that game in general.
Well, frankly, I was surprised. I expected them to win the game, and I also expected them to battle at least evenly in the trenches, which is where I think the game was lost. They couldn't get off the field defensively. Even though they didn't give up that many total yards, it felt like Stanford dominated the game. 14 of 21 on third downs. They just kept gashing them. Gaffney on 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, 3rd and 2. You just knew he was going to get that first down. And then offensively, Mark Helfrich, Oregon always says that time of possession doesn't matter, but this game it really did, because when Oregon had the ball, and they only had it about 18 minutes, they weren't doing much with it. And then they had the key turnover with D'Anthony Thomas in the second quarter, down 14-0. Early on, when they were 4th and goal at the 4 in the first quarter, I thought they should have put points on the board. They didn't. Stanford goes 96 yards for a touchdown. It kind of changed the whole tone of the game.
Even though Stanford led at one point 26-0, most people didn't give them a shot to come back. Oregon did put up 20 points on the board, but I think where the game turned there was on a couple of key situations. There was one, a 3rd down and 6 deep in Stanford territory and Oregon territory. Oregon had a chance to stop Kevin Hogan, and they didn't. They also had an opportunity to put those points on the board like you talked about, so it could have been a much different football game.
Oh, absolutely. A few plays here and there, it definitely turned the complexion of the game. You mentioned I think Stanford was only up 7-0 when Oregon was going to stop them. I thought, I almost turned my head for a minute. 3 guys are there. They've got him. There's no way he gets a first down, but he does. And then they went down and scored a touchdown, I believe, there. But, give Oregon some credit here. Down 26-0 with 11 minutes to go, and the game ends up being close. And if they get that the last onside kick, 2 minutes left, they might have won the game, and they'd be talking about one of the great comebacks in college football history. So I don't think Oregon's done by any means. Stanford just presents matchup problems for the Ducks.
The question is, where do they go from here? We talked about you were a voter in the AP poll. Where did you vote Oregon after the loss?
Well, I actually voted them a little lower than they turned up in the AP poll. I believe they're 7th, and I have them 9th, and they were, where are they, 6th, I think, in the most
BCS.
important, which is the BCS standings. I think they're right there with the best one-loss teams in the country, and you never know how things play out. I think it's too much needs to happen for Oregon to get to the BCS National Championship game. Even if Alabama were to lose, I think a one-loss Alabama stays ahead of them. Florida State is not going to lose with the schedule they have. But if Stanford loses at USC this Saturday, which is a very real possibility, Oregon wins its final 3 games, they're in the Pac-12 championship with a shot, and they would be in the Rose Bowl if they win. And even if they don't, Warren, at 11-1, which is where I pretty much think Oregon will finish, they'll go to a BCS game, either the Fiesta, the Sugar, or the Orange. So there's a lot to play for.
Yeah, there is an at-large bid available to the Ducks if they win out. They've got 3 good games, 3 winnable games left, and then of course if things go crazy this weekend and Stanford does go down, they'll have the Pac-12 championship most likely here in Eugene. As for one of the issues that came up this week in practice was, much like they were saying last week, is can this Oregon team sustain and beat and compete against a much bigger, more physical team? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the losses they've had in the last 4 years, I think, or maybe 5, or since the Chip Kelly era began in 2009, they lost to LSU, they lost to Auburn, they lost to Boise State, they lost to Ohio State, Stanford twice, and I think USC beat them twice. They struggle against big physical teams, but I would say, who doesn't? Their record is 54-8 since the start of the 2009 season, and other than maybe Alabama, nobody's had a run of excellence like that. And I think as they continue to recruit, they maybe need to get a little bit bigger and more physical in the trenches. Maybe it has to do with the weight room. They're not that far away. I don't think they need to just scrap what they're doing, start over, and have a whole different philosophy. I don't think Oregon is that far away.
One of the other issues that was widely discussed over the last several days and this week was the injury to Marcus Mariota. I admit on Thursday in Palo Alto, I had heard rumors but saw nothing of an injury. Last week in practice, didn't see anything that was unusual with Marcus. But the way that he played in that game against Stanford, there was certainly something wrong.
Well, first of all, in practice, we don't get to see anything.
Yeah.
In fact, we're sitting where Oregon does practice right now. It'd be so much more interesting to see them practice. Right. But Marcus said today that even though he's acknowledged there is an issue, that it's not an excuse. He practiced fully today. He expects to play. He said he will play against Utah. But you could see that on the read option, I don't remember him running at all on the read option. And that's a big one run. And maybe they were taking that away, but I think he was reluctant to run because on a few of his scrambles, I remember there was like a 4th and 6 or 7 in the second half, and he ran for the first down.
And
so he could run. And that's a huge part of Oregon's offense. I think if he's completely healthy, maybe the game's a little different, but injuries are part of the game. And he's going to suck it up and play from here.
Marcus said, as you said today when we talked to Marcus, he said he's raised not to think or feel pain, and that's one of the things I like about this kid is he is a competitor. He knew that he had to play. He went back into the game after being injured on Thursday, and he was back at practice this week. So I expect that he will play against Utah. He did say that Jeff Locke, probably who was the number 2, played with the 2s and didn't take a lot of reps in practice. But we'll see against Utah. We'll see. I expect if Oregon gets up by maybe 2 or 3 touchdowns, Marcus probably will come to the sideline.
Right, and Mark did mention in a conference call yesterday that Locke is definitely number 2.
Right.
And not that there's that much of a difference with Jake Rodriguez, but he is number 2. But Marcus. His numbers really, if you look at it, I think he was 20 for 34 for 250 yards and a couple touchdowns, and he was under a lot of pressure. He really didn't play badly.
No.
It's just because he's Marcus Mariota, and he was the Heisman Trophy front runner in a signature game. You expected more from him. You thought he would do better, but I think it's more a reflection of how the entire team played rather than just pointing to one player.
No doubt that his Heisman candidacy took a bit of a hit on that game. He had a big national audience, and of course the Ducks lost. But he still has not thrown an interception this year in over 300 attempts, which is incredible just in itself. But I expect that he will get invited to New York City. What about you?
I think he'll go to New York City. I think that he's no longer the front runner.
Right.
I think Jameis Winston and Johnny Manziel. You just can't ignore what he's done. Even though A&M's had 2 losses, he's been spectacular in most every game, and they scored, I believe, 42 points against Alabama, beat Alabama last year. But I think Marcus will get an invite, and you never know how this will play out. If his numbers are staggering, he has no interceptions at the end of the year, and Oregon's maybe in the Rose Bowl, it's possible. I think he'll be there. I don't think he'll win it.
Lastly, we saw a lot of fans disappointed in this loss. A lot of people wanted Oregon to win, of course, and continue their trek to the national championship. But there's still, as you mentioned early on, there's a lot of football left to be played. What's fun for us in this situation, we get to kind of talk about what if and where they might go from here. Let's just say Stanford wins out, and they win the Pac-12. They'll, of course, most likely go to the Rose Bowl. Oregon still has a chance to go to their 5th consecutive BCS bowl game, likely New Orleans or the Orange Bowl. So, and that says a lot.
And you're ruling, you don't think it'll be the Fiesta Bowl because they've been there 3 of the last 4 years?
I don't know. A lot of people, what I've been seeing and reading has said a matchup with Clemson in the Orange Bowl would be a good matchup. Maybe Texas A&M in the Sugar Bowl.
Texas A&M would be a great matchup. And what about Baylor?
Yeah.
What about Baylor maybe in the Fiesta Bowl? I mean, there's a lot of wonderful games out there. It's too bad that we're a year away from the 4-team playoff because Oregon could be back in that mix this year.
Sure.
But they're going to play in a great game. I expect them to rebound. It's still it's a tremendous season. It's hard to go undefeated. There's only 4 from major conferences that are unbeaten right now. And Oregon got to 8-0, which is a great accomplishment. They were 10-0 last year. So I think Duck fans, although really disappointed right now, and understandably so, I think they'll rev it back up just like the team will against Utah.
Well, the good news at this point is when you get late in the season and 3 regular season games left, there's a lot of injuries. Players are beaten up. Not so much with the Ducks. Last year at this point, they were much more beaten up than they are this year. Not, with Marcus's injury, let's set that aside because we really don't know how much he is injured. But the good news is that the Oregon Ducks are pretty healthy going into these last 3 games against Utah, and then they've got the Civil War, of course, and then they go to Arizona. So, a lot left to play for. I'm Warren Williamson with Gary Horowitz of the Statesman Journal. You can follow Gary all season long on Twitter at @GHorowitz. You can go to Statesman Journal and find all of his great blogs, his great stories there as well. For Oregon Duck Football News, I'm Warren Williamson with Gary Horowitz. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.